Good morning. I'm Ken Leon-Guerrero, and this is
Kim?
and we are so lucky today because we have with us a doctor and an author who has a very unique perspective that is badly needed for those of us who are looking to improve the quality of our life through this lifestyle. So I have the honor of introducing Dr. Vera Tarman. Please.
Hello. Hello. Thank you so much for asking me to come on today.
Well, you bring a unique perspective because for those of us who have been following this way of living, and I call it a lifestyle change because it is a lifestyle change, we focus too much on the foods and not enough on motivation and drive. And that's why when I heard your talk the other day, it just made it, so many pieces fell into place. Because even though we've been working hard at this, there have been times when our behaviors were actually sabotaging our success and we didn't understand it. So that's why we're so excited to hear from you.
Okay, so do you want me to just launch in then?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. So you've asked me to do a talk, and often I call this, you use the word saboteur, and I think it's a great word. I'm going to just say this is basically sugar addiction. Is there a saboteur in the house of healthy eating? Is there something that's sabotaging us? And I'm going to give a little bit of a explanation about it. But before I'll do that, let me just give a little bit of my own personal journey into this, because it's always helpful to have people hear the personal side of it. So I'm an addictions physician, and I work outside of Toronto, Ontario, in Canada, and I work in a addictions treatment center. And I oversee 4 different houses and probably about 1,000 different people with addictions over the course of a year. And I haven't actually done the numbers, but I can say that at least a third of the people that are in addiction, I have seen the same behavior when they come in with their drug, whether it be cocaine or alcohol or marijuana, put down that drug, and then all of a sudden they're using the food that they're eating in the same way. And it's such a pattern that I just could not sit still and not comment on that, because what I saw was that people would leave saying, I'm clean and I'm sober, but then they would go out eating the way that they never did before, then decide, oh, I have to stop eating, and then they would pick up their drug because they hadn't really addressed the addiction. So that was my sort of personal, professional angle. But I had my own personal story of being as early as in my 20s, like so many young women in their 20s, struggled with, being on a diet and then gaining weight, and being on a diet and gaining weight. Probably like so many other people who are listening right now have had in their life sort of this yo-yo dieting and whatnot. And it wasn't until my professional life and seeing that pattern and then seeing it in myself that I thought, oh my God, there's something about this that I have to explore. And so I started to think about the whole issue of difficulty eating, this I'm doing well with my food plan, and then something sabotages me. And I thought we could use the same paradigm, the same understanding that we do with when somebody's trying to quit smoking or trying to quit drinking, in the same way with sugar or specific foods. And the more that I did that, the more that it fit into place. And then I started looking for research to substantiate that. And sure enough, that's what's happening now. So that's the background. I have my own personal story and professional story. But for those of you who are listening, you might be thinking, I don't have a problem with another addiction, and I'm just here because I want to, follow my low carb food plan, and I'm having this problem where I keep stumbling. This idea of you're doing really well, you're losing the weight, and then what is happening? But by month 3, month 6, even 2 years into it, we call it the carb creep. I'm just going to say we're reintroducing addictive foods, and then you're back into the problem that you were in the first place. So I want to suggest to you that although you may not consider yourself as struggling from an addiction, is there some dynamic of addiction sabotaging your food plan? So what I want to start with is, by way of explaining all of this, is to say that when we look at something from an addiction angle, first of all addiction is just taking a normal part of our brain and it's basically been hijacked by some substance. So the normal part of our brain, I want to explain first, and how food fits into that. We have in our sort of instinctual, non-thinking part of our brain, it's what we call the limbic system, the instinctual, motivational, emotional part of our brain, which is much more powerful than thinking, by the way. This part of our brain tells us what is, it serves us to do things that are helpful for our survival. So I enjoy eating because it's helpful for survival. I enjoy drinking a cold glass of water because it's helpful for survival. And when I'm really thirsty, that cold glass of water is just exquisite. And when I'm not so thirsty, it's not, because I don't need the water. So we have this motivational piece that gives us a plus whenever we need something. And when we need food because we're hungry, food is delicious. And then when we're full, it's not so delicious. How that actually works. And the same with sex, same with social engagement, same with all sorts of things that we need. When we need them, they're really good. And then when we've had enough, we're done. It's like there's checks and balances in a normal system. And what behind the story of that, I'm just going to explain for the purposes, because I don't want to get too technical here, but I do want to mention the one neurochemical called dopamine. And dopamine is our motivational chemical that makes us want something. So if I open the fridge and say, what do I want? I'm really wanting to say, how can I feel this feeling of dopamine, which is the want. And we, all of us, every single one of us, like sweet because dopamine is attached to sweet. Sweet is energy dense, and so is fat, energy dense. And in nature, there is nothing that is both sweet and fat at the same time, except actually mother's milk. But other than that, so anyway, our system is built perfectly for the foods that are out there. I'm not talking about processed food. I'm just talking about regular unprocessed food, vegetables, fruits, meats, cheese, whatever, like non-processed stuff. And when I'm hungry, they're delicious. And when I'm full, they're not. And the dopamine is never too high that it will overwhelm me. That's in a normal food environment. So just to set out that we already have a sweet tooth, but it's never that powerful. Like there's only so many cherries or apples that I want to eat because I'm going to feel full and bloated, and I'm not going to eat that many figs because what happens the next day? I have diarrhea. So we have natural checks and balances with real food. And so we enjoy our food, and then we can put it down until we're not hungry anymore, and then are hungry and eat again. Processed food comes into the picture, and it has, because it's made, I mean, processed food is basically an industry where they've taken natural foods and processed them in such a way that there is more sugar, more fat, more salt than nature should be. I am fine with nature. All of us human beings are fine with nature. That's why when you think about a paleo food plan, which is, before the processed food industry, anything that we assume our hunter-gatherer communities ate is relatively safe. And it's actually why the keto plan also, which tends to avoid processed foods because they're so high in calories, is relatively safe. And why when people are on that plan, they're pretty safe and they lose weight and they feel better, because we're kind of going back to our natural reward pathway as well as our health. I'm not going to talk about the health piece, that's a whole other talk, but the mental health, it gives us our mental health back. And my cravings are not too big. There is only as big as I'm hungry, and then I'm done. But when we get into the processed area where, we've got food engineers that are actually saying, how can we make this dopamine more? How can we heighten that experience to be more than just the normal vegetables and fruits and cheese and meat and whatever? Then we're basically taking ourselves outside of the realm of what I can normally say no to. And so this is where you get that experience where you still want something, even though you're full, even though part of you is saying, I don't actually want this, but there's this sense of like an itch or a craving or a persistent nagging of, well, there's still more cookies in that bag that I want to finish, or there's still more something. It's that thing that's actually dopamine saying it's too big. And normally you might say, well, I like this, but I'm full and I'm good. But even though you're trying to say I'm full, and when a person is binging and overeating, they're full. They actually wish they could stop, but that persistent nag is still there, and that's dopamine hiked up beyond the natural. So this is a physiological process, and I want to say one of the message that I really try to say in my talk is willpower, the ability to say no, I'm done, finish push the plate away, works perfectly well in an unprocessed food, unhijacked environment. But when we are moving into an environment that's been processed, it's outside of that realm, and willpower has less and less of a role. So that a person is saying, I don't really need to be going up, at the buffet the third time. I really wish I didn't see that, but there you are going anyway. It's like something is leading you. That's the dopamine, and that's essentially the an illness that's taking over. So first of all, what I want to say is that if you live in the basically 2021, where it's mostly processed foods out there, and you have to deliberately choose to go to stores that are like Whole Foods, where you're just going and eating like real food, unless you're making a deliberate intent to do that, you're exposed to the processed food industry. And so that you're living in an environment that you don't even realize is, I want to say, toxic, because it's beyond what our ability to control our food is. You don't even notice it anymore because it's become the norm. And part of the job of people like myself and others advocating in the field is to say, this is not normal. What is normal is the low carb food plan, is the paleo food plan. That's what we were supposed to be eating, but now we're moved into this other realm. It's not only a psychological issue, a health issue, but a political issue. Like, why are we letting the food industry dominate us in this way? Anyway, so the food industry has, when you're eating this food, the normal regulators of appetite are derailed so that things like willpower don't work anymore. And if you're in that situation for long enough, then the brain actually starts to adapt. It's like, I might have a cigarette. I'm not a smoker. I'll have the effect of the cigarette, or maybe I'll have a drink and I'll feel a little bit, woozy. But if I do that every day, a little bit over the course of, I don't know, a few weeks or a couple of months, I'm not going to feel that cigarette anymore, and I'm not going to feel that drink anymore. And if I really want to feel a little bit more tipsy, I have to have more. So what ends up happening is, if you have persistent exposure to the enhanced experience of either the drug or food, processed food. And by the way, when I mean that, I number one mean sugar, but it's not just sugar. It's also flour. It's also some grains. It's also anything that breaks our food down more quickly than it should. Anyway, so anyway, if you're living in that kind of a circumstance for too long, your body starts to adapt, and then we call that tolerance. So I might enjoy one or two pieces of cake, every once in a while. That's how I grew up, actually. You just have a piece of cake once in a while. Kids now are having a piece of, or people now are having a piece of cake every day, sometimes instead of their a real meal. And they no longer feel the effect of one or two. It's they now need that just to feel normal, because the body adapts to that enhanced experience because it wants you to feel it's like, we like the slight pleasure of maybe a drink or a nice I don't know, piece of ice cream or something like that. Like, I mean, there's a subtle, pleasant feeling that comes with that. But if you have it too often, too much, then that goes away. And now you need a lot more just to get that little bit of effect. So the gradual process of addiction is kicking in very subtly. And I want to say subtly because it's the same way that I can become a diabetic quickly if I drink a lot of alcohol, fairly quickly, like in the space of 5 or 6 years, if I drink every day a 40 ounce or something like that. If I'm eating, you know, a tub of ice cream every day, I'm going to become a diabetic just the same fatty liver happens, the same diabetes happens, the same thing, because alcohol is just fermented sugar. So sugar is doing the same thing, but it takes longer. It's more subtle. It'll take maybe 10 years instead of 5. And similarly in the brain, I might not get addicted as quickly to sugar as I will with cigarettes or drinking, but it's happening subtly over time as the body adjusts to the enhanced experience. Because we don't want, even though we may enjoy that feeling of enhancement, we actually our brain doesn't. It likes it for a couple of times, and then it wants to make it feel like normal. So I need not just a couple of, I don't know if you have Girl Guide cookies there, but it's a classic example, just a couple of cookies, but then before you know it, you need the whole row. And then before you know it, you want the whole bag. And it's just to get that experience again, because 1 or 2 just won't cut it. You're getting tolerant. And then as that continues, of course, now you're starting to gain weight and you know, get problems with your blood sugar levels. And at a certain point, usually somebody says, I have to stop. And when they find that they stop, believe it or not, and you won't notice it because it's subtle, but once you notice it, you can't not notice it anymore. You start to get into withdrawal. And what does withdrawal mean from sugar? It means, how am I going to, just imagine, so if there's anybody out there listening going, okay, how do I know if I've got a problem? Think about what is your pleasurable food that you have in the evening before you go to bed, and now you're not going to have it. You're just not going to have it. No, you're not going to have any more of the cookies, the cakes, could have been the glass of wine. For the alcoholic, it would be like saying no more glass of wine at night or bottle of wine at night. For the food addict or the sugar addict, it would be no more tub of ice cream at night, no more cookies, no more dessert. You're just going to have the bare basics, a piece of steak and that's it, or something like that. And if you have any sense of, oh, how will I sleep? A sense of agitation, a sense of deprivation. These are all the subtle signs of an addiction in the making. I mean, at this point, it's a withdrawal. It's just a withdrawal. And a lot of physicians will not acknowledge that withdrawal exists, but it does exist. It's that feeling of irritability, insomnia, a sense of gross deprivation that's quite poignant for a few days, maybe even up to a week. I think some people in the keto world call it the carb flu because it's actually physical as well. Well, that's actually it's the carbs. It really does have a physical and a mental effect. And then it passes, just like every other withdrawal passes. But if you don't recognize that, what are you going to do? You reach for the whatever it is again, just to feel okay. And you might be saying, "Oh, I wish I had better willpower," but it's like asking the heroin addict, "I wish they would stop feeling like they need more." They need more because otherwise they're going to feel, morbidly sick, and that's exactly what happens to us, but at a lower, low-key level, so low-key that people laugh it off. But my job is ultimately to say that this condition, just like any other addiction, gets progressive and worse, and that we eventually see people reaching huge amounts of weight because they're eating processed foods that, this is the whole insulin hypothesis, puts on weight. Eating sugar, enhances the insulin, and insulin is a fat storing hormone. And so they end up gaining a lot of weight. And so over time, what happens is the person gains a lot more weight. They keep trying to stop using their drug they keep trying to stop eating. And they find that the withdrawal is so powerful that they can't stop anymore. And it becomes this cycle of stopping, super deprivation, and then you just end up eating more, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And then we call that addiction. You're caught in this spiral. And the key to get out of that spiral is, first of all, to acknowledge that this is a phenomenon that's happening, and that it's not just your foolishness, your poor willpower. It is actually a physiological response to the foods that we're eating of today, which are processed carbs and sugar, that is overwhelming our system. It's just too much. So that's sort of the basic piece there. Now, if you want to say what is normal, what is okay, World Health Organization says, a glass of wine a day is okay, and but not more than 2 or 3. And in terms of sugar, it's 6 teaspoons a day. And by the way, you don't even need that sugar. We don't need it. We have ketones. We have other ways to get energy. But in terms of what's safe, not more than that. And basically, any processed food you look at, that's already 6 teaspoons right there. The short answer to what do I do here is stop eating processed food. Go back to eating a really basic, real food, a food plan that is as low carb as possible. It doesn't have to be no carbs, but certainly not processed carbs. So we're talking like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, a little bit of fruit, not too much, and lots of proteins and fats. That stuff is our brain can handle without this overwhelming experience, which then we're just simply trying to adapt to that.
That was one of the nice things about the book, because in the book, you walk us through different examples of addictions, and then you roll it into how that's mirrored in food addictions, because there's a tendency for people not to realize that food is addictive. But when you lay it out in the way that you did in the book, walking us through examples of other types of addictions and then mirroring it with how it matches line for line. Food addiction matches line for line with alcohol addiction, with drug addiction, with gambling, and other types of activities that stimulate the brain in a certain way.
Yes.
And that was just eye-opening.
Yeah. And it's also it can also be a gateway. So if I smoked cigarettes and now I quit smoking, what do people do? They end up eating more because it's just transferred the addiction. If a person is trying to quit eating, they end up doing something else more, usually. Like it actually is really the same thing. It's just the dopamine that's been heightened. And one of the worries that I have is that children of today are being given foods that are addictive making, which is basically refined sugars and carbs, and so that when they get older, they are like primed to become addicted to other substances. This really worries me. Like marijuana to start with, certainly cigarettes, alcohol, cocaine, and then this is the piece that really worries me. It's not just my generation, it's the young generation.
Absolutely. I can identify with that because I think my issue with sugar started when I was only about 3 years old. My parents went through a difficult divorce, and I was a very sensitive child. I got very depressed, and my mom would give me a cookie, and it made me feel better. And then it continued throughout my life. I could abstain for a while, but then eventually I would have a stressful situation come up, and the first thing I wanted was something sweet. And then then it developed into disease, because I feel I probably had insulin resistance starting at a very young age due to this addiction to sugar. It started with PCOS, then severe endometriosis, followed closely behind that. By the age 42, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Yeah. So it was like everything snowballed, and it was all being driven by this one addiction that I had to sugar.
Yeah.
But if I couldn't get the sugar, I would eat things like potatoes, pasta,
Yeah.
rice. I mean, I would eat big bowls of it to get that rush of that comfort feeling, where the serotonin would go up in my brain. But I didn't understand any of this. I had no idea. And I never thought of myself as an addict. I
No.
thought the only thing I had been addicted to was cigarettes, and
Yeah.
I'd given that up, in 1980. And,
Right.
but, it wasn't until I was able to finally step away from the sugar when I made the commitment to go low carb. And I went very low carb. I went 20 grams or less.
Yeah.
And it took a couple of weeks, like you said, to have the physical part of the addiction go away, the constant cravings. But then I decided I needed to abstain from even the artificial sweeteners or the keto-friendly sweeteners. I did that for 2 months. And I had to do that to wean myself. But then guess what happened? 8 months later, the holidays rolled around. I did not succumb to sugar, but guess what? I succumbed to the keto sweeteners in the form of making Christmas cookies. I'd had a tradition for 10 years. I mean, from the time I was 10 years old, of being the cookie girl, the cookie lady. Everybody looked forward to my big baskets of homemade cookies, candies, and cakes. I was a great baker. And then I was faced with, I can't do this anymore. And I actually broke down and cried. I sobbed because I looked at my husband. I said, what do I do now?
Exactly.
Well, you can make keto treats. You can give keto treats. I said, okay, that's what I'll do. So I did. But guess what I did? I had lost 30 pounds up to that point, eating ketogenic diet. Then I had to sample all these keto goodies to make sure they were worth giving away, right?
Yeah.
Between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day, when I finally got back on the scale, because I stopped weighing myself, I wasn't checking my blood sugars. I had gained back 10 pounds and my blood sugars were hovering around 300 again after I'd made all this progress, and it was just like this big epiphany. Oh, you hadn't addressed something very important, and that was the emotional aspect of the addiction. I was emotionally addicted to the sugar as well as the physical addiction. So but I think that both components are very important to know.
Yeah. But actually, you were still addicted to a physical part of that, because a dopamine is our neurochemical. It's our neurochemical of motivation and want. And if you think about something like gambling, which is an addiction, you can see that as no question. There's an addiction. You're not putting anything into your mouth or to your body. It is entirely the anticipation of the big win or the big lose, and that dopamine that's it. But it's a big anticipation. I'm going to win a lot or lose a lot. So it's still dopamine, and I haven't put anything into my mouth. So when you have a sweetener, the expectation is this is going to be really sweet. This is going to be really delicious. And even if there's no insulin effect or very little, the dopamine is still high. So the addiction is still working. Do you see?
Right. And so one cookie wasn't enough. I had to keep eating.
Exactly, because you were after the expectation of what it would be like. And of course, even if you realize, it's not really as sweet as I think, you keep thinking it's going to be. It's that little nagging thing that says, well, the next one will hit the sweet spot. It'll give it to me, whatever it is that I'm looking for. And of course, you forget it, right? That's all dopamine. So even that's one of the reasons when people always ask me, are sweeteners are okay? I say it might be a useful harm reduction bridge, but ultimately you want to stop that too. Yeah. Because you're still chasing the sweet high. You still want the cookie.
Right. Now at this point in the journey, almost 20 months in, I can enjoy like a very low, mildly sweet shortcake with berries and whipped cream. That I can have that. I can feel satisfied. I'm done. I can go, a month without even having anything
Okay.
similar again. So that's I know what my tolerance level is now.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
and so I'm fortunate in that way. But if that were to become a problem, I would
Yes.
have to stop that too.
Yeah,
And
I'm glad that
I
you
know
said-
that.
Oh, good, because that can change. Like that tolerance level that you talk about is something that can change, and it can often change in a circumstance like more stress, hormones are off. Like when a person
Right.
becomes menopausal, they can't eat stuff that they could before. So as long as you're aware and you're honest. Now the thing about addiction is honesty is a hard one. We call it
Yes.
denial.
Hard one, yes, absolutely.
We call it denial. The addict is the one, the last one who sees that they have a problem because they don't want to see it.
No, they don't want. I was really good at what I call diabetic denial. You know,
Yeah,
I would
right.
stop checking my blood sugars until I couldn't step one foot in front of the other, and I knew my blood sugars were high, and then I would check, and I'd be like at 400. You know, it was crazy. It was crazy. But I would go into these periods of denial that could last like a couple of months at a time.
Yes.
But you're right, because earlier this year, I lost a very dear friend that I'd known for over 50 years. And I found myself, I wasn't even conscious that I was doing it at first, standing in front of the pantry with the door open, looking inside. I was in heavy grief.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm standing there and it kind of just hit me in the chest. You're looking for something.
Yeah.
There's nothing there because I'd cleaned the pantry out a long time ago, right? And so, but it was a realization that I was reacting on a subconscious level to the stress, right?
And this is addiction.
Yeah.
That's called euphoric recall. You're just remembering something, and it can be almost a body sensation.
Right. Now, you gave a couple of tests in the book to see, are you addicted?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I was right on the cusp on both tests. I had answered 3 on one test and 2 on the other. So I could say to myself, oh, I'm not addicted to sugar, but I know I am. I know I am. And I can never touch it again.
Yeah. So, for people who are wondering what are some of the questions, I'll ask some of the questions just for interest's sake, so and by the way, sometimes it has some of the same questions as if you have an eating disorder, but they're actually 2 different conditions. But if you first of all struggle with your weight on a repeated basis, that's number 1. Have you tried to stop and you find that you can't stop? That's another one. Have you started to do behaviors like, have you ever lied about what food you had because you don't want to have to share it? So, do you have anything in the house? No, because I have my own stash and I don't want you to know about it. So have you lied about it? Have you ever thrown away food only to crawl back later and get it because you've decided, no, I do want it actually after all? And people will literally go in the garbage and retrieve something. Have you stolen food? Have you stolen food from somebody else? Have you eaten in such a way that you would not want to eat that way in front of other people? In other words, do you eat privately and eat in a different way? It's almost like you have a private relationship with food that is not public. Let me see, what are some other questions?
I'm already totally addicted.
You lied. Sorry, what was that?
I am addicted. I mean, when I went through that test, it's like, oh, no, the thing I like about this is because for so many of us who are on this journey, and especially out here in the islands where we don't have a lot of medical support, because a lot of the doctors out here are low carb resistant. I mean, I sat there, I go to my doctor. I haven't seen him in a year. I've lost 66 pounds. My numbers are incredible. And he tells me, oh, you're great. I can't believe how good you look. Your numbers are fantastic. How did you do it? I said, I went keto. Oh, you got to stop that. You got to stop that right away. It's going to kill you. I mean, we get that out here far too often. We're through these programs like this, we're hoping that we're educating more of our local physicians about this. We do have some out here, thank God. But the addiction part is something that's not being addressed, because until I recognized it, I was tempted a lot. But then once I broke the addiction, broke the craving, and that's a part you talk about. Once you get past the craving part,
Yes.
that was very important for me because now I can walk through a supermarket or something and I'm not tempted to grab all my favorites like I used to.
Mhm.
Exactly. I mean, and you have to, unfortunately, you have more awareness of your situation when you're out of it. But when you're in it, I mean, do you lie about your addiction? That's one of the main things is, we don't want to see it in ourselves. You mentioned a little earlier, like, talking about insulin resistance. So obviously you're fairly familiar with the whole idea of how insulin works in the keto
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
context.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could almost say that addiction is, because we have a stigma about addiction, like, oh, I'm not an addict. But let's change the wording and say, let's not use the word addiction. Basically, it's a dopamine resistance. I'm living in a heightened experience of where my dopamine goes up, just like the insulin goes up with too much sugar. You become insulin resistant, and now that's the problem. So now you start to have all the ill effects from that dopamine, that insulin resistance. And similarly, the problem is it's this dopamine resistance because of the heightened experience. We don't need to call it addiction. We can just say I'm dopamine resistant. And you are not as dopamine resistant because you're still able to eat a little bit of something like a keto treat, whereas somebody else who's further dopamine resistant, maybe because of a previous addiction, they might have had bariatric surgery and they're more sensitive to an addiction like alcohol or sugar because they're absorbing it more quickly. They cannot have even the keto treat. And like, it just depends on the person and how far they are, how dopamine resistant they are. Yeah, so it's a physiological condition and we have to stop.
Absolutely.
It's so stigmatic. And that's why people don't want to say, I'm not an addict. But
Well, there's a lot of shame that comes with the word addiction, right?
Yes.
And so I think, but for me, I needed to kind of identify with that addict part of it because that made it more serious for me. And my life depended on it. I was killing myself one bite at a time. I was going to die from complications of type 2 diabetes.
Exactly.
And my whole reason for starting low carb in the first place was to put diabetes in remission because I lost my father. He was only 2 years, well, actually a year older than I am now. I'm about to turn 66. He was 67 when he passed away. They'd taken one leg and they were about to take the other leg and he died of a massive stroke in the hospital.
Right. Yeah.
I did not want to go down that road. And every person on my father's side of the family had either type 1 or type 2 diabetes.
Yes.
So a strong propensity, I was kind of set up genetically in the first place. But the interesting thing is that only 2 months in to abstaining from the sugar, my chronic major depression, clinical depression of 27 years, for which I had to take an antidepressant, subsided, and I was able to go off the antidepressant for the very first time.
I knew you were going to say that.
It's been over 17 months now, and I have no recurrence of depression.
Wow.
My brain got a chance to heal.
You've just hit on another reason why it's so important to see the hazardous effect of sugar mentally. So I actually think that when a person is type 2 diabetic, there's a very good chance, because now they're insulin resistant, that there's a very good chance that they're also dopamine resistant. In other words, they're going to be more acutely addicted to sugar, which you just described. And a good way to, you've just said, because you got off your antidepressants, sugar is a mood modifying substance. And so are high carb processed things like what did you mention before? The potato chips, the fries, the pasta, all those things are mood modifying. And so you have a lot of it, you feel a little bit of a boost and you stop and you crash. And there you were having probably a wonky mood profile because of the foods you were eating.
Oh, absolutely. And it fed the depression.
Yes.
And the thing is that I remember friends of mine, when I would bring a dessert, like to a holiday thing, they would say, oh, this is so sweet. And I'd say, well, it's not that sweet. Well, the problem was that my tongue had been bathed in so much glucose that I couldn't taste the sweet.
Yes,
So
that's
I
right.
eat more. And I was shooting
Exactly.
insulin. I was on insulin for the last 4 years before I went keto.
Oh,
And I was up to 170 units by the time I went keto, off of it within the first 2 weeks.
wow.
But yeah, but I think that, I couldn't taste the sweet, so I would eat more to get that satisfaction, right?
Exactly. Yes.
And then I'd
that's
have
right.
to shoot more insulin to cover the carbs. And it was just a
Right.
vicious cycle, and it was killing me.
Yes,
Yeah.
and intertwined in that cycle, you've just described the addiction cycle too. They're very closely connected.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I
And-
have a couple of questions that
Sure.
people sent in that I would like to ask you real quick here before we have to wrap up.
Can I just say, while you did, let me just say another piece
Sure.
on the mood thing. For people who have attention deficit disorder, I think it's the same thing, that sugar will heighten that experience. And so that if you get off sugar, you may find that whatever attention deficit you truly suffer is actually manageable, because that will make it much, much worse. So it's not just depression, it's also ADHD, it's a
That's
whole lot of
our
conditions.
son has ADHD. And
Yeah.
the whole family, his wife, my son, they actually introduced us to low carb eating. And
Yes.
4 of us went together and started this. And his ADHD, of course, it didn't go completely away, but oh my goodness, the difference was night and day. And he'd suffered with this from the time,
Oh.
he started school. It was insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So he
can't-
was already sensitive, and the sugar just blew him over.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow, did it ever?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, he could hardly make eye contact with you. It was so bad.
Wow.
This person asks, will eating gluten-free breadcrumbs for crunch, she says, is that a pica, P-I-C-A? I'm not sure what that means. She says, so how does pica play into all this good addiction stuff? I haven't heard enough info yet to make any other informed question. And she's a person that just joined the sugar-free group. So I'm not sure what she means by pica, but
Well, pica is, I don't know if this is what she thinks, P-I-C-A, right? Is that what
Yeah.
she said? That's when people want to eat dirt, like that classic thing of you eat sand or dirt.
Right.
It's a sort of, I guess, psychiatric condition. I
Yeah,
don't think it's that. I don't think it's that. But see, the thing is, I would say it depends on how dopamine resistant you are, how much addicted you are. If it's processed food, even keto, even gluten-free,
Right.
it's still a carb, and it's still not a natural food with all of the fiber, all of the water, all of the protection. See, there's only so much glucose, sucrose that the brain, that the body can handle. And in nature's package, the real food itself, we're fine with that. But when you make it something processed, even if it's low carb, it's still processed, and it's still the fiber, all the things have been taken out of it so that you can eat. I mean, you literally just have one little tiny bit, but you're going to have it crumbled all over your whatever, and then
Right.
it's too. It's still too much, and I think it's still inviting an aberrant response, which is this addictive response. This happens when things are outside of the norm. That's why I
Right.
say back to eating real food, and it's the glycemic index. You just don't want foods that are too close to sugar or processed.
Well, I think the food industry has caught on to the fact that there's a huge
Yes.
money to be made on keto
Yes.
products, and
Yes.
the shelves are exploding with keto products now.
I know, and that's why keto worked really well 5 years ago, and now we're seeing people starting to fall. Why? Again, they're falling on these little, sweet these tricks.
Absolutely.
That's
I have another question
Go
here.
back to the pure, and you're going to be okay.
She says, another viewer says, I think, let's see that's the wrong one. Sorry. Okay, she says, how to deal with a family member who you see binging, or they're doing page 4, but they keep messing up. How do you deal with a family member you're witnessing? She says page 4, that means a very strict
Yes.
120 carbs keto,
Yeah.
but they
Well,
keep binging.
Yeah, in the addiction paradigm, there's nothing I can do to get somebody to stop if they're not ready to stop. So we just tell people to get out of the way of trying to convince them. It's only going to get their back up, especially if they're in denial. The only thing you can do is be a model of success. This is what I do, and you're stuck in this place. I'm free of this. I used to be where you are, and I have no desire. Like you were saying, I could walk into a store and not be tempted anymore. Like they have no idea. What does that feel like? You know what that feels like, and there you are with your 60-pound loss, feeling not deprived at all. So the most you can do is be a model and a support, and if they're willing, help them by not. Like, don't bring this stuff in. I'm sure you're not doing that anyway, but the environment, if it's in the house, they're going to want it. If it's not in the house, they might be able to, who wants to put your shoes and boots on and walk down the store, that extra effort, they might just say, forget it. So if you help them by not having it in the house, but really it's to be a model and just say, when you're ready, ask me how I did it and I'll tell you.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, was how important is it to do like a pantry and fridge purge and cleanse?
Essential.
Yeah.
Essential. Because we call this people, places, things. The moment I see it, I'm like, this part of the brain is subconscious and it's much quicker than consciousness. The moment I see it, I've already decided I want it. Yeah. And now I have to consciously stop myself. That's a lot of work. It's better that it's not there at all. Because willpower, by the way, let's just talk about this for a minute because it's worthy of taking a minute. Willpower, even if you're not addicted, the Dalai Lama, whatever, like a person who is so chill, willpower is only about 20 minutes to half an hour in a day. And if you decide I want to quit something, and in the morning you're full of vim and vigor of I'm going to quit, and then a couple of hours later you go to the Starbucks or something and you see the candies, whatever the croissant, you decide, no, I'm not going to have it. Well, that's already 5 minutes down. And then in the afternoon there's another 5 minutes down. By the time the evening comes, you open up the fridge and it's there. How do you say no? You've already used up your allotment for the day. And if you've been wired to constantly be thinking about it and have it all over the place, it's gone in the first couple of hours. And by lunchtime, you're eating again.
Exactly.
So the best thing to do is don't challenge yourself, so that I haven't had sugar for a number of years, and if I have a weak spot, I've got maybe 20 minutes before I start seriously thinking about it. I'm going to use that 20 minutes to call somebody, to get out of the environment, to say, look, I'm upset. What should I do? I'm going to use the 20 minutes wisely before I'm in trouble again. And if it's in the house, 20 minutes is up, and then what?
Yeah.
You're in trouble.
That's
Well,
right.
I'm going to go to screen share here with you so that you can see something here.
Okay.
Thank you for shopping at Super Happy Mart.
This is Kim at the start of our journey.
Okay.
And here she is today.
Yeah.
So you can see there's a big difference. But not only that, but she also healed her mobility issues.
Oh, yeah, because she doesn't have, yeah.
Well, yeah, I have a genetic condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, hypermobility type.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And so that was always played into kind of a role too, because I was trying to medicate, myself for pain as well.
Yes. Yes.
Stress. And but the thing that happened, and this is everything kind of accumulated around the 2-month mark, I lost that cane. I didn't need it any longer to walk, and I can walk up a couple of miles a day now. My osteoarthritis abated and my joint issues, though I still have Ehlers-Danlos because it's a genetic condition,
Yeah.
but it became so much more manageable. It was just amazing once I removed the sugar and the flour and the excessive carbohydrates. Yeah.
And now,
Yeah, look at you.
oh, sorry. Oh, I lost it. Okay, here we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Now that is me at 338 pounds.
Oh,
And now
yeah.
I'm at 212
uh-huh.
right here.
Yeah.
But the whole point is that once I got free of the addiction, and I didn't know it at the time, but the key was when I got to the point where I could actually walk into places and not feel the need or the urge.
Yeah, that's the dopamine.
Yeah. And, you know, I mean, we
Quiet.
get it all the time. We get it in television, we get it in magazines and
Yes.
newspapers.
Yes.
And then right here, this is, you brought up something in the book that I wanted to bring up, you know, how important it is for us to look at the quality, because we have an option, black coffee, or we have this, and you look at the carbohydrate load.
Yeah.
We are living on 20 grams a day or less, and here this one drink has 84 grams of carbs in it.
That's
And the
incredible.
part that the addictive behavior, okay, we're going to go back to the addictive behavior. We talk to people all the time and they're amazed at our progress. And then we try to share with them. And they tell us, oh, you know, I can't live without my rice. I can't live without my Coke. You know, they're basically saying we're addicts.
Well, it's the same here in the islands. Rice is life. I mean, that's how much it is, right?
Yes.
But our daughter-in-law, who is Filipino, she ate rice every day of her entire life, sometimes 3 or 4 cups of it. She was able to, when she got past it, the initial withdrawal, she has been totally satisfied with cauliflower rice. She goes, who needs the other stuff, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like the alcoholic who says, my bottle is my best friend. How can I, you know, live without this? It's the very same thing. And yes, I have to agree with you. And there you are. It only took 2 or 3 weeks for you to get on the other side. I mean, that's the good news that I really want people to hear. That, I mean, 2 things: that if you're struggling with willpower, it's not you. It's this phenomena that has happened because of the actual substance that you're eating that has taken over, essentially. And that the good news is when you put that down, suffer the withdrawal, and there are enough people to help you with that. I mean, a lot of people will say it's silly, but there's enough of us around to say, no, this is real. Take it seriously. Do what you need to do for those 2 or 3 weeks to stay clean. Lo and behold, you will walk out on the other side free. Like, it's worth it.
It's priceless, really. The freedom is priceless. But then you have to also, that's when the emotional healing has to start.
Yes, of course.
Right.
Because
after you get past that. Yeah.
Because if you're used to using sugar whenever you're upset to muffle the upset, well, now you have to learn how to deal with the upset.
Right.
And plus all the upsets that you haven't dealt with all these years in the back because you just keep eating it, but they're piling up and you have to deal with all that stuff too. Absolutely right. It's the beginning of a journey, but it's a journey to a new life.
That's why it was so important for us to do this talk today in this video to share out here, because carb addiction is just another type of an addiction. And I'm hoping that more people realize there is life beyond that withdrawal, that the withdrawal, and you've seen it with how many thousands of people you've treated, that they get through the withdrawal and then there's life. You know, you know, the withdrawal is not the rest of their life. That is just the transition from feeling crappy on a daily basis to feeling a little crappier while you go through withdrawal of food and food product. And then on the other side, there is a higher quality of life, a better quality of life available for you.
Absolutely. And even better news, whatever weight you've lost will be sustainable. You're not going to gain it back in 6 months.
That's right.
This yo-yo thing is done. Like, I know people who have lost 100 pounds and that's 10 years ago. And, you know, most of the time you see people, they lose weight and they gain it back and more. You don't see that anymore. It's gone. It's gone. It's gone. It's gone. Because you don't want to go back to that life.
Yeah. My weight has stabilized now at 133 pounds for about the past 4 months.
Uh-huh.
And that is the weight that I was 30 years ago before everything, the crescendo of, being diagnosed with the PCOS and the type 2 diabetes and the major depression and everything. So,
Yeah.
but during that 30 years, I would lose, I would abstain for a while, I would lose, but then I'd always gain the weight back. And at one point I was topping out around 200 pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an amazing freedom you gain with your body, your mind, and ultimately your spirit, because when everything comes into balance, that's where the real healing.
We want to thank you so much for your time today. Could you share with us how people who've watched this video can learn more or learn more about your program, your videos, your channels?
Sure. Well, I have my book, which is called Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction, which you mentioned.
Wonderful book.
Thank you. You can get that on Amazon pretty easily. And it's on Audible as well. You can listen to it. It's a Kindle, of course. I have a sugar-free Facebook group if you want to get a group that's free for support to quit sugar, to get through those 3 weeks and then to live that way onwards. It's called I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar-Free for Life, a Facebook group. And I have, of course, my YouTube channel, Vera Tarman. And I have a webpage called addictionsunplugged.com. And finally, I also have a Food Junkies podcast. And if you just type in Food Junkies podcast, you'll see it.
We'll make sure all that information is in the show notes when we post. We're going to be posting this tomorrow, and we'll go ahead and send you a link.
Okay, thank you very much for asking me to.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate, and I know it's going to help a lot of people.